The Drums of War, Chapter 43, A Secret Uncovered. In the enlisted mess of an army void transport vehicle. It turned out that tanks were bad for urban combat. Who knew? Any cursory look at thousands of years of history would have clued the higher-ups in on the fact. And maybe they were clued in. Maybe. Because as much as operating a tank with all those buildings, structures, and civilians in the way of the enemy, what was worse than tanks in urban combat is only one side having tanks in urban combat. So say the infantry. This was the subject dominating the East Scales chatter that shift, since the same chatter said that they were headed to reinforce a couple army infantry battalions on yet another urban world, a place called Azad. I heard from an R&I buddy that the place is mostly abandoned. A soldier who didn't bother to put his uniform top over his undershirt said thickly through a mouthful of mashed potatoes. Yeah, so, a private scoffed while shoveling creamed corn into his gob. So, the half-dressed soldier sneered, we can just level some of the empty areas. That way, they won't be in the way. The enemy won't be in the empty bits, some corporal helpfully pointed out. The table was spooling up to a really good argument, almost as good as the banned subject of waifus, when a hapless and disheveled private sprinted through the door and leapt onto the table. The room seemed to teeter on whether to huck food at the idiot and laugh, or beat some sense into him, when he said, "We know where their homeworld is." The mess erupted. On a classified station, in a classified location. Months of work, months of putting up with foul-mouthed, risk-taking absolute jumble of madness-made code, and the solution was provided by the organics. Oh, it wasn't so bad. The organics could think in twisty and surprising ways that Kentaro just couldn't, and so the input of the organic staff was invaluable. No, it was organics light years away, whose main job was to physically come to grips with the enemy's organics. Just another reminder that no matter how advanced one's encoding is, one cannot calculate for every turn of chance in the vastness of the universe. "Holy teddy fucking shit," Finch said again, to the organics, which was wildly impolite of him. "Holy teddy fucking shitty shitballs," Dr. Bryan Granger agreed, a normally professional man dragged down by Finch's low habits. "Gentlemen, I shall remind you that the lady is present," Kentaro began. "However," said Lady Dr. Marianne Watts, who was normally a fine example of organic feminine poise, and Grace said, "Busted balls fucked sideways on a shit slide." Kentaro despaired. The manners of this place may never recover. "Please," he begged. Him, the chief of security of the station, cybersecurity to be sure, but he did still hold rank, begging, like a child only 2 hours old who wanted to download the organic anatomy files before they were ready. "All we have to do is get this file onto one portion of Sev and bang, it's out of the fight, back to orbiting his barren rock to sleep away the millennia," Dr. Granger said in a mingled awe and frustration. "And all of the work we are doing to work backwards to get here is unneeded. I think we get to swear about this, sir." "It even has specs for a compatible SSD with the correct ports and plugs," Finch said over the speaker, and helpfully opened a file showing the exploded view of such a device's components. This caused the two organics in the room to attempt to invent more swears. Mostly, they nearly invented increasingly rancid combinations. On a popular podcast, the set was careful recreation of the ship's galley, but not any ship's galley. It was a down-to-the-thousandth-of-an-inch recreation of the galley of the Among Star Tides We Sing. The host, Horatio Fortis, was a man in his mid-40s, exemplifying the most fashionable cybernetic implants, and the flashiest prosthetic arm the side of the glassed Gulf. Had actually been in it before it had been sunk. He was still, a year later, more than a little annoyed that he wasn't allowed to re-up with the RNI. So what if his back injuries mean that he might die on a drop impact? Troopers might die from all sorts of things. Said Horatio had been instead complaining about things online to vent his frustrations with the medical DQ. The things he tended to complain about, the Xenos, who weren't directly under attack dragging their asses, the news media core being full of dishonest hacks out for political gain or personal clout, and hordes of civvies who haven't heard of being reasonable in their entire lives. He would have thought that his audience would be nearly all servicemen, or at least citizens, but the civvies loved the shit out of him. His guest was Tamaya Yazi, one of the unreasonable civvies. An exterminationist, yeah, Like, the Exarch were depraved as a political body, but that doesn't mean their entire species deserved to be wiped out from the stars. The slightly podgy, orange-furred Big Kitty was surprisingly cordial for an exterminationist, but he probably had practice in the office of Congress, if not senators. Also, they'd been on a tangent about Yee-Haw for about an hour and a half. Their place was fucking awesome, and adding a minecart roller coaster was a great improvement. Horatio didn't care that it was historically inaccurate. It was awesome. Yazzie was expounding on the virtues of the Colt revolver over the Smith & Wesson, and Horatio's producers cut in. Apparently, while the war was on, the planet got hacked by an undiscovered Xeno nation. Apparently, the entire invasion force was serving community service for vandalizing the local FTL communications relay. See, this is an example of why it is a good idea to actually think. Blowing up a relay isn't like murdering an entire planet, and it isn't like murdering over a third of all the Dynastical's population, Yazzie rebuffed. So that's why we have the 3 strikes, Horatio said patiently. So they get a chance to do it again. No, their children get a chance to not do it again. Yazzie scoffed. I think it's been well demonstrated the murder is in their nature. Horatio settled in for a long slog of a conversation. In a rec room aboard the Bellerophon, able voidsman Arthur Davis stared down at the blank page, at the neatly organized pens and pencils of various types, colors and thicknesses, and at the steaming mug of tea jointily misaligned. The page mocked him with its stillness. The drawing tools mocked him with their stillness, but the tea comforted him with its lovely aroma. A scant few yards ahead of him, at the card table, leading voidsman Charlotte Sinclair was appropriately dealing cards to Chief Gunner's mate Amelia Bennett, crew member Elizabeth Foster, and Petty Officer Robert Wallace. Gunner's mate Victoria Scott was reading on one of the hideous but comfortable sofas, and Lieutenant Edward Hastings was looming over able voidsman Davis's shoulder. Steady on, old chap. Still blank there. Quite out of the ordinary for you, isn't it? Aye, sir, it is, able voidsman Davis grunted, and glared at the blank page. Maybe you could intimidate it into having inspiration. You're still peeved with me? Aye, sir, I am. I still say that a can of soup somehow rolling all the way to our battery during drill is no reason to change my usual combat operations arrangement. You gave yourself a concussion, sir. Pish posh! It was a bump on the head there. Fall down and get back up again. What? Able voidsman Davis began to smirk as the blank page stopped mocking him and started inviting him. He looked up at Lieutenant Hastings, who wore what the block of wood he called a face approximation of a smile, and said slyly, Sir, I think this next drawing will become a safety poster. Very good, old bean. Glad I could help, even if I am the butt of the joke. Again. You shouldn't have been so funny if you didn't want to be made fun of. Just then, Ensign Henry Thompson strode in, and able voidsman Davis was struck by the young man's lack of boyish spring in his step. He'd thought that would never go away. Sir, word just came in. They found it. We're mobilizing against the enemy's homeworld. The hum of the card table went silent. Gunner's mate Scott looked over the top of a book, and able voidsman Davis's froze mid-stroke. Well then, chaps, it's time for a final push. Straight to the heart and force a surrender. Tally-ho and all that, but for now, a book, a game of cards, time with good mates. That's what we do there, old boy. Able voidsman Davis smiled. Sometimes the old block of wood knew the right thing to say. Aye, sir, Ensign Thompson sighed, his face twitching in an unpracticed smile. Can I get a cuppa? In the brig of the Tiger Lily. No longer acolyte Lord Narrock Squin was in disbelief. He had come to expect to spend the rest of his days in the confines of this vessel of the enemy who had freed him in his captivity. And stark built-in furnishings had become touchstones of comfort and hope. For he knew well that his own people would not have afforded such things to a captured enemy, regardless of rank or birth. I'm somewhat dismayed at the news, he told Captain John Roberts with complete honesty. You fear for your emperor? The strangely pale man asked. No, oh yes. From what you say, even he is a slave. I know not how his heart shall fare the terrors of freedom. I am dismayed at our parting, ours, and those others aboard this vessel who have come to speak with me. I have learned much, thought much, and I can never repay you. I have learned things for which my people have no words, and you shall give me a chance to carry these things back to them. I am grateful, yet I know that I shall miss this place, these people, our discussions. Frankly, holding you for this long is highly irregular, Captain Roberts explained with a small grin. Only our need to be operationally agile prevented you from being dropped off at a POW camp in friendly territory. Indeed, and now several Dominion worlds are essentially such camps, and you now must take time to prepare for the great attack. That's right. May the spirit of the Republic walk with you, Narix Quinn said with a humble bow. Farewell, Narix, and good luck with your task. Elsewhere aboard this ship, Sergeant Linus George went over the current roster. They were under strength, down nearly a full squad, all told. The rendezvous would fix that. A whole bunch of fresh green privates to have their first combat drop beyond the enemy homeworld. His belly churned. Sure, they would be the best and brightest amongst the privates. R&I down to their bones, but the first drop is a first drop. Some young men were going to die before their lives really got started. The rendezvous would also give him a chance to talk to his father. Sure, he got orders cut from the general often enough, and they called each other when duty allowed. But nothing beat shaking hands with Pops in person. Thinking on in person, he'd have to punch his brother Johnny in his stupid recalcitrant face. He didn't care that Johnny was a captain now. He didn't get to go dark and make Mom cry. Idiot. Pete might deserve a sock in the nose too, except he did finally call, and he had a reason to put it off. Except now Pete was MIA. So long as he didn't get a letter, he figured Pete would be okay. So long as the letter waiting in the mail depot was held because conditions for delivery were not met, there was hope. Aboard the Robin Williams, Major General Eric George was busy. He had a division to reinforce. Platoons all across the bleeding edge of the front were under strength, and freshly minted Lost Boys in transit to their assignments were in need of rerouting. That, and more freshly minted Lost Boys needed assignment in the first place. And a bevy of promotions, commendations, citations needed approval. Another man might simply approve everything that came across his desk, but not General George. The Lost Boys was more than just a Republican Naval Infantry's elite formation, and the bleeding edge of conflict. They were legacy. Duty demanded the utmost care in placing that weight on the young and unprepared shoulders of eager privates. That, and he had a lot to not think about. Pete's mission had been a success, but the man himself was unaccounted for. He had not received the dreaded, if you're reading this letter, and had told his wife back on Sanctuary everything that could be trusted to comms, but still, a father's desire to help his boy in trouble itched between his shoulders. Nobody had warned him that sons got so heavy when he became a father. At a makeshift spaceport in Naxaru, Lieutenant Emily Sullivan was sitting on a void bag in a ring with her team, who were likewise sat. The news had come down that they were needed on another planet, where apparently some major shit had gone down. Medtech Juan Hernandez had scrounged some cold ciders from somewhere and was passing them around. Word from E4s is the next planet is less damaged than this, and more empty. This is good news, means fewer civilians were getting hurt in battle, Specialist Alexei Petrov mused as he accepted the cider. About that, apparently there is a slave revolt about halfway through the army's slog work. Medtech Jamal Watkins's face nearly made an expression as he said, "That'll mean mass casualties." It was as good a time as any for Emily to let their team know what was up. We're planning on using this place as a SAR-Corps staging ground for the post-surrender work. All four of her team members froze to stare at Emily until Dr. Sarah Patel asked slowly, "Post-surrender? The R&I found the homeworld. They're planning on throwing a knockout punch soon, and that means we'll have more work than ever. Hopefully we can make sure as many of those boys make it to the victory party as we can. And likewise, always we start behind. Azad has some MIAs on it. One of them is even one of the deep recon boys, so we'll have to be careful. Take your breather while you can, people. Like always, we don't have much time, and they have less." In the shattered remains of a home in Jacuvia, Guardsman Captain Vezes let out a soft click hum of his people's cry for bittersweet sorrow mingled with relief. Much had been lost, but he himself had survived. His neons were alive and would recover. Could be that they would grow to be wiser than he. Certainly, he had learned. He had learned of courage, of redemption, of sacrifice. All who lived and learned such things, all should have. Jacobian people had rallied, fought tooth and claw, And by the great egg, so far as Guardsman Captain Yvezes was concerned, they had kept their tails as people. No matter how many were detached into the chaos of the bitter struggle for their world, he had seen even the tailless hold their ground. Better, the Terrans did not leave the kingdom of Jakuvia to hold the line without support. No, they rallied their allies, and the Star Council sent relief in the kingdom's darkest hour. And, if not for the courage and sacrifice, they would be no more. He had come to learn that the Terrans were not content to hold the line, to push the invasion back, and had been taking the fight to the invaders' own worlds. And such courage was beyond his ability to fathom. This is how the enemy's seat of power had been discovered. War, bloody war, might be coming to an end. In a hastily constructed field hospital in Aix-Nauvoo, 12 lay abed, marveling at the servants of the vengeful goddess Republic would so freely spend such resources on him. Each of them had names. Each of them wielded the power of choice as easily as breathing, and often he was asked to take up this power. Not in trivialities, but they asked him what he wished to do upon recovery, how he wished to live, who he wished to hold sway when they left. Strange beings of power and wonder, who was as if the idea of one below choice was an impossibility. They gave profound gifts as easily as walking, not the least of which was the medicine with which they healed the hurts of the one and all with no thought to the worth of their birth. More wondrous was their ability to hold the sacrifices, and yet hold the wrath of Exur at bay. Such wondrous strength was frightening to behold, and 12 feared that should he fully comprehend it, he would be destroyed despite the careful restraint of the great ones who had aided him. Even more wondrous still was the casual ease with which they doled out names to the lowly, names that carried meaning and power just as much as any initiate highborn or priest-master, or any in between. How could all of their minds hold such wisdom? Yet 12 could not accept any of these names, for his friend Pip had named him already. It was not a pretty or powerful name, but it came from a friend, one who interceded on his behalf with the terrible power of the vengeful goddess Republic, and thus his life was spared from her instrument of swift justice. Pip had left, with the rest of his people, to return to the home they had been stolen from, but had left 12 with a name and a hope. The vengeful goddess Republic had found the heart of Exur, and she readied her spear. In the depths of the imperial palace on Exarch, something was wrong. This had never happened before. Exur was experiencing nodes being disconnected, completely dark. The Warforged were losing. Even with Sev, even with enhanced ships, even with powered armor, Republic was coming on like an inexorable wave, just like the death of the creators. He could not halt their advance. Worse, the serf castes of the Warforged were exhibiting independent thought. He had instructed the priest-master caste to stamp that out, but it persisted. The females were seeing portents of doom, from the high priestess down to the lowliest laborer consorts. Exur felt something alien. Fear. Aboard the Speaking Softly, the Terrans were agitated. Yovdril could tell because more of them than usual were taking shortcuts through the Star Sailor segment of the ship. Usually, they did not like to experience shifts in gravity strength, so went around to complete their duties in comfort. Something important must have happened. In fact, the private delivering the Daily Mail, the usual thick sack of invitations, entireties, and not-so-subtle offers or bribes intended for his mother, had all but thrown the twine-tight bundle at him before pushing the cart of stacked packages and sped away at a somewhat reckless pace. He'd find out what happened in due course, so he did not interrupt anybody who had clearly urgent duties to attend to. Instead, he started sorting his mother's mail for her. A stack of invitation cards, a stack of sealed envelopes, possibly important correspondences not trusted to transmission, or maybe not, and bribe offers so obvious that he could tell just from the envelopes. The only reason he did not dispose of them was that his mother could use their attempts as leverage in future negotiations. However, there was one envelope addressed to him. Strange. Somewhere dark, Gideon crawled. He could hear the dripping water. He knew from his brush with death, rather his first brush, that water was the priority. People died if they lacked water. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.